everybody, I'm Mr. Wally of the Jackson County Library Services. How are you doing today? I'm in the Medford Library today, and I'm here to tell you a story. And today's story is of stone soup, and this is how the tale goes. Once upon a time there was, and twice upon a time there wasn't, a soldier. He was an old soldier. His name was Noah. He had spent years in the king's service, fighting the king's wars. And now that there was peace throughout the land, he was raring and aching to go home. But he was way over on this side of the country, and his city, Bremen, was way over there. Well, the only way to get from here to there was to start walking. So he put on his stout soldier boots, and he put on his little backpack, his tall soldier hat, and he gave his rifle away because he didn't need that anymore. But he kept his soldier's knife, put it into his belt. And with that, he said goodbye to everyone and began his journey home. Well, as he made his way across the country, when he went through large towns and even bigger cities, no one really paid much attention to him. He was just another soldier. And so long as he had a few coins in his pocket, people left him alone. But when he went through these smaller villages, that was a different story. They had a whole different impression of soldiers. And they just wanted him to move along. So in between these towns and villages and cities, maybe he would find an abandoned orchard and get an apple or two, or he'd find the remains of an old house and go to the garden which was untended, and he would find, a carrot or three. Mostly he was hungry. He made his way across the country. Well, one day he was walking through a village, and that village, like many others, the doors would close and the windows would shut and the blinds would get latched up. And it didn't feel any different than any other place he'd been, so he just kept on walking. And he was almost out of the village when up ahead he spied an old lady out in her yard. She was raking up the last of the fall leaves. And she looked up from her work and she saw the soldier. And she called out to him, "Hello there, young man, how are you doing today?" And he was a polite fellow, and so he said, "Hello, grandmother, I'm doing fine, I'm making my way home." He says, "Oh, where are you off to?" He says, "Well, I'm off to Bremen town. I have a long ways to go. So I hope that life continues to treat you well." And she looks up and says, "Well, I hope the peace holds." And she says, "Is there anything I can do for you before you leave?" And he says, "No, I think I have everything I need, but, well, maybe there is something you can do for me. I would really, if you have a kettle and some wood, I'd be very thankful. You see, because I have this stone that I make soup with, and I really would love to have a nice full, warming cup of broth before I continue on down the road." And she looked at him and said, "You're going to make soup from a stone?" "Well, yes, I can't tell you how delicious this soup is. Whoa, the broth is always so delicious and rich. Tell me, really, you've never had stone soup? I'd be more than happy to share mine with you." Well, she thought, stone from a soup, imagine that. "Well, I think I can come up with that kettle and the wood for you," she says. So she ran into her cottage and she brought out a big kettle. And she went over to her wood pile and brought over some wood, and the soldier made kindling out of the big pieces of wood and put it all underneath the pot, the little flint. Got the fire going, and then he took his canteen and poured in his water, and as he saw it start to, a little vapor started coming up off of it, he reached into his pack, and he got this big, beautiful stone, and he wiped it all off, and blop, 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 into the soup it went. And the little old lady and the soldier were standing over it, and they looked and looked, and the water was just starting to simmer. And the old soldier, he reached over to the wood pile and got a stick and stirred and stirred and stirred. And she looked at him and said, "Well, is it ready yet?" And the soldier said, "There's a little ways to go." But you know what would really make it taste pretty darn wonderful? Maybe a few onion skins or the tops of some garlic. I think that might help a lot. Said the old lady. I think I can manage that. And so she ran back into her cottage again, and she went into her room, and she pushed aside the floorboards, and underneath her bed, she found a couple of onions. She had some things hidden away. And she found some garlic. And she ran back out, gave them to the soldier. The soldier took his knife and cut them all up and threw them in the pot. Took his stick and started stirring them up, and the old lady and the soldier stood there, and they looked at each other, and said, "Soup from a stone, imagine that." Well, while they were standing there looking and gazing into that pot of soup, down the road came a butcher. The butcher was in his wagon, and he was leading behind some livestock, and he was on his way to the village to go to the market. And he sees the old lady there, and he knows her, and calls out, "Hello there, old lady, how are you doing today?" And he says, we're doing just fine." And he calls him, "What are you guys doing standing around that pot?" He says, "We're making stone soup." Well, he'd never heard of stone soup, so he had to get out and find out what that was all about. So he walked over and he looked over into the pot, and it was simmering away, and boy, it's smelling good. And the soldier looks up, "Well, it's going to be really delicious, but I see your old dog there is chewing on a bone. Can I have that bone? I could put it in the soup, and man, oh man, it would taste pretty fantastic." Well, the butcher looks and says, "I'm not going to give you my dog's bone." And he went back over into his wagon, and he got out some big strings of sausage, and a big shank, and some, big chunk of fat, and some chicken beaks and skin and stuff, and brings it back to the soldier, and they plop it into the pot. And the soldier stirs and stirs and stirs. And the little old lady and the butcher look at each other, and they look at the soldier and says, "Soup from a stone. Imagine that." Well, while they're all standing over looking into that pot, come down the road came a farmer and his wife, and they were heading to the village, to the market too, and they see everyone standing around that pot, so they stop their horse and they climb out of their wagon and they walk over and say, "What's going on?" "So we're making soup from a stone." "Wow, soup from a stone? I've made soup from all sorts of things, but never from a stone. Is it good?" And the soldier says, "Best soup in the land." And he's stirring and stirring and stirring, and they're all looking at him, and they look at the soup, and they look back at the soldier and says, "Is it ready yet?" He says, "No, not quite there. It's almost there. But if we had some carrot tops, or the bottom of a squash, or some corn silk or something, I think that'd really just make it pop." Well, the farmer's wife looked at each other and said, "Corn silk? Tops of the bottoms of a squash." And they ran over into their wagon, and they brought back big things of corn, and they brought back some big potatoes and big squash and carrots and all sorts of stuff. And the soldier cuts everything up, and the farmer helped with his knife, and they put everything in the pot. And they add some more water and some more wood, and the level of the pot's rising, and now it's bubbling away. It just smells so good. And the soldier's stirring and stirring, and they're all looking at each other. "Is it ready yet?" Soldier says, "Not quite." And they all look at each other and go, "Man, imagine, soup from a stone. Wow, fantastic." And about that time, down the road came the baker. And the baker sees all his friends and all the other merchants out there standing around the fire. And so he gets out of his wagon. He walks over, and he stands over the pot, and they're all looking at the pot, and the soldier's stirring and stirring and stirring. He looks up and says, "What are we doing?" He says, "We're making soup from a stone." They said, "Soup from a stone?" Well, the baker had never heard of such a thing. And the soldier's stirring around and says, it's pretty good stuff, and it's almost ready. But it'd really be great if we just had an old crusty piece of bread to throw in there to thicken up a little bit." Well, the baker was a pretty proud guy. He thought, a crusty loaf of bread? I don't do crusty. And he ran back out into his wagon, and he brought back big bag of freshly baked bread, and then he brought back a bag of cornmeal and a bag of oats, and he threw in some oats and he threw in some cornmeal, and the soldier stirred and stirred and stirred and had a little bit more water, bring the level of that soup up even more and more, and it was just like, oh, and it was bubbling, and everyone's going, is it ready yet? And the soldier says, no, not quite, but almost there, and they look at each other and go, soup from a stone, imagine that. Well, about that time, the merchants come down the road, and they're in the beautiful wagon, and it's full of all these fantastic things, and they see everyone standing around this bubbling pot, and so they stop, and they get out, and they walk up and say, what's going on here? Is it a party? Are we missing out? It says, no, we're making soup from a stone. And they look at each other, and they look at the crowd, and it's soup from a stone. And the soldier says, yep, finest soup in all the land. And it's almost done. It's just so close. But a pinch of salt or peppercorn or two, maybe there's a little glug of vinegar might just really take it over the top. And the merchant looks, at the crowd and the soldiers says, I don't think that we're going to just do a pinch of salt here. And they ran to their wagon and they brought back out a big can of salt and they threw some in it and a big pepper grinder and they put in some pepper and then they glug of vinegar and they brought a big flagon of wine for the table and they brought big wheels of cheese and the old lady went inside at that point and brought a tablecloth, some mugs and bowls for the soup and spoons and all of that. And just about that time, comes the local constable. Well, he saw all the wagons out in front of the old lady's house and all these people standing around the pot. And of course, his job was to make sure there was no trouble going on. So, and he gets off of his horse and he walks up, I want to find out what's going on here. So we're making soup from a stone, they said. Well, soldier, this is about it. He's stirring and stirring. He's looking at that pot. And the old lady looks at him and says, is it done yet? And he says, yes, it is. And with that, he takes a ladle out, and the old lady brings that out. He starts serving it up in the bowls. And the constable, he didn't bring anything. He just brought his appetite, and he sat down. And everybody else sat down. And they broke open the bread, and they cut open the cheese, and they poured the wine around, and they dug into that soup. And they ate, and they ate, and they ate, and they ate, until they got that soup all the way to the bottom of that pot. And they sat around full and content. And if they weren't friends before, they were certainly friends now. And they laughed, and they talked, until finally the soldier got up, and he walked over to that pot. He reached down, grabbed that stone, and wiped it off really good, put it in his backpack. And then he walked around, he shook everybody's hands, thanked them for such a fine time, and began his walk down the road. He walked and walked and walked until it became a small little dot, and then finally it was gone. And then the old lady and the butcher, the farmer and his wife, and the baker, and the merchants, and of course the constable. They all stood up and they shook hands and said, thank you for such a wonderful time. And the old lady looked at them and they looked at her and they all said at the same time, soup from a stone. Imagine that. And dilly down dale. That's the end of that tale.